So guys, last week we talked about the 10 Commandments, right? We talked about how the 10 Commandments is how we should love God fully and how we should have a relationship with him, right? So Moses, he says that verbally to them, right? And so Moses now goes up on the mountain, right? And God literally writes out the commandments on stone tablets for the Israelites, right? And so that's where we pick up here in Exodus 32, 1-6, when it says, when the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, come make us gods who will go before us. As for Moses, who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. Aaron answered them, take off your gold earrings that your wives, your sons, your daughters are wearing, and bring them to me. So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed to him and made it into an idol cast of the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then they said, these are your gods, Israel, who brought you out of Egypt. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord. So the next day, the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Afterward, they sat down to eat and drink and got up and indulged in revelry. So Moses has been on Mount Sinai now for 40 days, right? Just a little over a month, right? And the Israelites started being impatient, right? They were thinking that he might have died or something, right? So what's important to see is that he was in there for 40 days, right? So 40 days is often used in the Bible as a time for testing, right? So, but not all times is the testing bad. So here, right, the Israelites were being tested, not Moses, right? And so we're going to pull up a page and it's going to show the references that I've brought. It's only a few references. It's referenced actually 24 times in the Bible, but these are just a few times. So in Genesis 7:12, it's the rain fell for 40 days and 40 nights during the great flood. Matthew 4, Jesus was tempted by Satan for 40 days and 40 nights. Exodus 24-34, Moses was up on the mountain again for 40 days and 40 nights. And then Exodus 16:35, Israel wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And then lastly, Acts 1:1-3, Jesus appeared to his disciples 40 days after his resurrection, right? And so it isn't really far-fetched, though, for the Israelites to be worried about Moses, right? Because it makes me think of a story about Bailey's great-grandpa, right? His name is Grandpa Art. And so Grandpa Art was a hunter, right? And so it was normal for him to go hunting. So he went up on the mountain, right? He's about 80 years old at this time. He went up on the mountain. He's told his wife, I'll be back in 24 hours, right? And so it hit 24 hours, and his wife was really worried. So they got a whole search party of the whole city, and it's just a small city in Arizona, and they all went into the mountains and searched everywhere, right? They went to the trailhead, they found his car, they didn't find his ATV that he had with him, though, and they didn't find a rifle or him. So they were like, where is he? So they kept looking for a few days, and they couldn't find him. So they gave up, right? And then just a few days later, her Grandpa Art pulled up to a Dairy Queen, and everyone was like, where are you at? And he's like, man, I was just looking for the elk right here. And so there's this huge, I don't know how much pounds it was, but it's huge elk just sitting on the back of the ATV. And all of them are like, you've been gone for so many days. What were you doing? And all he was doing was hunting. He was just looking for the elk. So it's not really far-fetched that they were worried about him, right? When we get worried if somebody goes missing for 5 hours, somebody doesn't text you back, we get really worried about it. So if they had just trusted God, they would have not been worrying about if Moses would come back or not, because it was God who brought them out of Egypt, not Moses, right? And so they asked Aaron to construct a golden calf, and Aaron said yes. And they brought the gold jewelry that the Israelites had, right? Well, the gold jewelry is actually given to them by God from the Egyptians in Exodus 12. It was part of the last plague. He said, go grab the jewelry from the Egyptians for yourself. And so they use it to make a golden calf. So Aaron was put in charge of the Israelites while Moses was gone, and he fully screws it up. He disobeys God completely, right? He fully breaks the first and second commandment, saying, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, right? They believe now that this calf brought them out of Egypt. Realize how stupid this is, right? Did the calf part the Red Sea? No, right? Did the calf cause the plagues? No, right? So, why wouldn't you just remember that God did that, right? They instead just turned to a calf that they literally just made, right? So I think what they did, right, is they made this calf just so it can be manageable, right? It's manageable to them. They can teach it. They can tell it has this much power, right? They can completely just determine what they have, right? So Aaron saw this and he tried connecting this idol to God, right? By hosting a feast for him, right? I believe we do the same thing Aaron does here, right? And we connect spiritual value to something that doesn't deserve it, right? We connect God to something, right? So often we see this in like sports, right? We'll write down on our bracelet or on our helmets, Philippians 4:13, right? And we'll be like, oh, we're doing this for the glory of God. But in all reality, we're just doing it for the glory and fame for us, for just cool, right? We want to be cool, right? And so we also do this with music too a lot, right? We listen to rappers that say they're Christian, like Kanye, Kendrick Lamar, Chance the Rapper, right? They all say that they're Christian, right? But all their songs talk about drugs, alcohol, gangs, right? Sex, everything. It talks about everything, right? But we still listen to those things, even though they're not connected to God, but we think they are because they say they're Christian, right? And so God knows what the Israelites have done, and he says to Moses this, in Exodus 32, 9-14, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them. I may consume them in order that I may make a great nation out of you. But Moses implored the Lord, his God, and said, O Lord, why does your wrath burn hot against your people, whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt with great power, with a mighty hand? Why should the Egyptians say, with evil intent did you bring them out, to kill them in the mountains and to consume them from the face of the earth? Turn away from your burning anger and relent from this disaster against your people. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swore your own self. And the Lord relented from that disaster that he had spoke of to bringing on his people. But now, if you will forgive their sin, but if not, or Moses says, but if now you will not forgive their sin, but if not, blot me out from your book that you have written. But the Lord said to Moses, whoever has sinned against me, I will blot out of my book, right? So the Lord is angry with his people, right? Because they quickly decided to turn, right? 40 days, like I said, barely a month almost, right? And so we see that they gave something else God's glory of what they had done for them, right? They forgot. So Moses steps in and pleads to God on behalf of the Israelites by using his characteristics, right? The first characteristic, right, is his intentions, right? That he was evil, right? Moses tells the Lord that if he brings wrath on the Israelites, people will perceive him as an evil God and will think that his intentions were of harm, not of good, right? The next one is Moses tells him to remember his promise to the people of Israel that if he doesn't, people will look at him as a liar and an untrustworthy God, right? The Lord calmed himself and decided not to burn his wrath against his people, right? It's really important to realize how hard this is, right? So let's say that, like, I have family, right? I love my family, right? But if I get mad at my mom, it's really hard for me to still love them, right? Because she did something wrong against me, so why should I love them, right? It's really hard for us to do that. So Moses was the advocate and mediator for the Israelites. We are no different than the Israelites here, right? We need someone to step in for us, right? Because of our sin and our shame, right? So that is exactly what Jesus does for us every single time we sin, right? That he steps in and he works for us and he steps in and says, they're good still, right? And so Jesus succeeds every time, just like Moses did here, right? And so Moses goes to God and asks him to forgive the Israelites. And then if he chooses not to, Moses says to punish him, not the Israelites. He brings himself as a sacrifice to God for the Israelites, foreshadowing what Jesus will do for us and has done for us on the cross. So we'll pick up in Exodus 32, 19-20. And so as soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. He threw the tablets out of his hand and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf they had made and burned it in the fire and ground it into powder and scattered it in the water and made all the people of Israel drink it. And then Moses saw that the people had broken loose, for Aaron had let them break loose to the desertion, or either way, to their enemies. Then Moses stood in the gate and camp and said, who is on the Lord's side, come to me. And all the sons of Levi gathered around him. And he said to them, thus says the Lord, God of Israel, put your sword on your side, each of you, and go to and fro from the gate to gate through the camp, and each of you kill brothers and his companions and his neighbors. And the sons of Levi did according to what the word of Moses. And that day, about 3,000 men, or people in general, fell. So Moses went down from Mount Sinai, right? He was very angry. He was pissed, right? And so he got the 2 commandments and he shattered them, right? They had literally God's writing on them. And Moses was so angry, he broke the tablets, right? And I think that we see that he grounds up the calf and puts it in the water and makes them drink it, right? I think it's a way of him saying, to eat your own words, right? You just made this golden calf and you're saying he's almighty. Well, watch me just disintegrate him, make you drink him. Literally, you can defeat him. So why should he be praised, right? And so we see that that God asked Moses to get everyone that follows him still to gather their swords and kill their friends and family, right? He's basically purifying his people again. I know it's really, really hard because God just said don't murder, right, in the 10 Commandments, right? And then he says go and kill, right? But murder is completely different, right? Murder is just doing it out of your own intentions, right? God says this is how I purify my people for the glory of me, but also so that they can live and have a relationship with me, right? And so God gave Moses another chance to get the commandments, but first he proclaimed his name and his character, saying, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger and abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for the thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the 3rd and 4th generation. And Moses quickly bowed his head towards the earth and worshiped. And he said, if now I found favor in your sight, O Lord, please let the Lord go in the midst of us, for it is a stiff-necked people, and pardon our iniquity and our sin, and take us for your inheritance. The Lord told Moses his characteristics, right? The first one was that he said he was merciful and gracious, right? He gave them food and water, right, in the wilderness. Right? And then he's slow to anger. He dealt with their constant whining and just doubt, right? He loved steadfastly, and he showed them how to have a relationship with him with the commandments, right? He's faithful. He didn't clear all humanity when they messed up, like he did with the flood, right? And so he forgives sin. He doesn't kill Aaron when Aaron makes the calf, right? He's just. He killed the 3,000 that turned away from him. So these verses are are the most referenced in the Old Testament, with 27 times it's mentioned. We should really look at how important it is to see who God is, because if you want a relationship with somebody, you got to get to know them. You got to get to know them first, right? So like if I was wanting to be friends with Barrett, right, I'd have to get to know Barrett before I can be friends with him. Otherwise, we're just acquaintances, right? And so Moses instantly bowed and worshiped. He fell and worship because he knew who God was, and he asked them to come back and stay with him. He wanted God to be in close relationship with him and the Israelites. So he told Moses his characteristics because he needed Moses to realize the commandments in order to glorify God, not to give them a rule book of things they had to follow. So it's really cool that God tells Israelites who he was, because the gods they worshiped were unpredictable in Egypt, right? And so this is him basically saying, I'm predictable. I will do what I always will do. Right? He clearly lays out his expectations for them, right? If I want you to do something for me, right, and you don't do it for me, but I didn't tell you to do it, then how can I be mad at you, right? So God literally lays it all out, right, and they still screwed up, right? So God gave Moses the commandments again, and Moses went down to tell the Israelites, but his face was shining with the glory of God, right? Super bright, right? That it was so bright that the people of Israel were scared. They didn't want to come near. They said, no, right? And so finally the leaders came up to Moses and talked to Moses, and then eventually all the Israelites came and talked, right? Well, so his face was shining so much with the glory of God that they had to put a veil over his face. But what's really cool is that Moses only saw the back of God, literally the back of God, right? And Jesus' hand was still in front of Moses' face, and he barely saw the back of God, right? And he still was so impacted by the glory of God that it showed on his face so much. It was bright. It was shining, right? And so I just want to ask, why don't we seek God like that, right? why don't we want to have an interaction with him that changes our life that people can see, right? So like, why would we not want that? Why would we not want to have a close relationship? It shows us how to, right? It shows us that God steps in for us every time. So why would we not want to have an interaction with him? Why would we not want to show the glory of God to our friends, right? So that's all I have. Just a question. Think about that. Okay, let's pray.